why is this liberal democracy is on decline, and why is it that left has been so out of touch with people that even all those problems which liberals created, because left, if you think about it, has always talked about, first of all, class struggle and economic struggle, but they are being blamed for, everybody says, oh, far left has brought this wokeism of this post-truth of all this thing about gender identity, even though we support people's right to make their own decisions, but our main struggle was and is about economic equality, class struggle. But we are being blamed for all this policies because of which there has been big setback in the US to progressive liberal forces.
You know, uh, when I was asked to participate, I was told that I was going to talk about the failure of liberal democracy, and and that always becomes a very tricky and broad question for me, partly because I'm a critical theorist, and partly also because of the way you introduced the issue, because you took us back to John Locke and you took us to Marx, and then it became about all of liberalism and the history of liberalism, right? And if we go back there, then we've got a very long question to ask,
No,
right?
we'll
Because
be happy to listen to your current contemporary
but I
criticism
can't,
while
but I can't, but my point is that that contemporary issue is very tied up to even that way of introducing the issue, right? Because in the sense that if we're talking about Marx's critique of Locke on private property, you could say that in some sense we're coming back to the current problematic of how the left is talking about how the left failed, even how the left is talking about how the left failed to to uh, preempt what is happening in America with the far right, right? Think about how, say, Jacobin magazine is saying that the Democratic Party failed, or how Bernie Sanders is saying that we failed to address the working class struggle. I mean, there's all kinds of discourses taking place, even within the analysis on the political class, not just the theoretical class, right? And they're bleeding into each other in our circles, right? And so one answer, I think, quite simply is that, if we step back for a moment, we want to say, well, what do we mean by liberal democracy? Just simply, and do we actually think that there is, in the current moment, anywhere on the planet, and a viable governmental alternative to liberal democracy, right? Do we actually have a governmental structure that we want, even if you're leftists and Marxists, that is actually in the actually existing world possible as an alternative to liberal democracy, number one, right? And even when we are leftists, like the Sanderites or the Jacobin people, I'm now talking about Jacobin magazine, or those who are quoting Marx as, Marx is dear to my heart. I can turn you to the shelf here with the Grundrisse and Capital and all of that, right? But even if we have a critique of the Locke on private property, what are we actually talking about when we say that we want something as an alternative, right? So,
well, there has been alternatives presented by
if
like
I,
Piketty.
sure, if I may
Okay,
complete,
sure, sure.
right? So my point is that, but given the current configuration in the United States, I mean, there's no, and not just in the United States, this is a global catastrophe, right? I mean, there is no getting around the fact that whatever was the structure of democracy in America, in the United States, and in Europe, is not only in decline, it might actually be in demise. I'm talking about Giorgia Meloni. I'm talking about what's happening in France. I'm talking about, what's happening across Europe, right? And one of the axes of that decline, right, is the response to immigrants, right? And authoritarianism right now is fundamentally predicated on the fear of the immigrant. There's no getting around it, right? And how it's been operationalized. And that has something. And so when we talk about the fear of that we're not catering to the working class, of course, one of the things that nobody's talking about when we use that in the United States, at least when we use that metric, is yes, but why is it then that so much of what's happening in America is about race and migration as well, right? And I say this as somebody who is fundamentally sympathetic to the fact that we have failed on the question of the working class. So I do think that one of the reasons that so to back up, I think one of the reasons that liberal democracy is in decline, and now I'm going to seem to be arguing against myself, is that neoliberalism has been on the rise, and that liberals and most of the so-called oppositional parties, and now you can take the Democrats, who neoliberalized starting with Clinton, right, and embraced the third way, or you can take Blair, who basically gut renovated and destroyed the Labour Party in the United Kingdom, and then you can sort of follow that across Europe as well. Neoliberalism became the norm in the 80s. And so there was, in fact, no alternative to neoliberalism. And what started happening within the parameters of liberal democracy, which was you get to choose between increasingly alternatives that don't look like alternatives. So to my analysis is that electoral politics and elections basically became a kind of hostage taking. You have no choice, and this is what the liberal side or the progressive side said, you have no choice. You have to vote for us, the Democrats said, or the Labour Party said, because look, the alternative is so much more ghastly, and the three protections that you have left under the welfare state are going to become 2.5 and then 1.5 and 0.5. And people increasingly just kept saying no. So every election that we've had recently has been basically people saying we want change. They don't know what they want, but basically what we've got now, I think in the West, right, where we still have the illusion or patina of democracy, which is basically, let's just say for a moment, and then I'll shut up, is that the working notion of democracy right now for us is, and I won't go into even the theory of liberal democracy, right, is that democracy right now in the West is the illusion that the majority of the population, increasingly a very, very slender majority, gets the illusion of freedom in choosing its leadership, right? And that slender majority is increasingly saying in each election, we do not like the incumbent and we are voting for change. And if you look at the patterns, that's what they're saying.